Shalom to those watching this video. I wanted to touch base on the topic of multiple wives. I'm not totally against multiple wives, however, there needs to be more understanding and not just taking advantage of it by having multiple women. In the days of old, the nation of Yasharal took multiple wives for the purpose of building up the nation. Now let's start with our father Abraham. Bereshit or Genesis 16, 1-3. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, born him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, Yahuwah has restrained me from bearing. I pray you, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. Now, two things need to be noted. For the purpose of bearing children, because Sarah was barren, she took and gave Abraham her maid to bear children. The other fact is she chose a wife for him. He didn't go out and choose one. This same child that was born from Hagar would be Ishmael, father of the Ishmaelites. Later, Sarah does conceive and bear Abraham Yitzhak, or Isaac, who is the father of the chosen seed, through his son Jacob. Now, because Hagar despised Sarah in her eyes, Sarah put her and her son away. Although, when you read earlier canons, Abraham still kept contact with his son Ishmael. Now, after the death of our mother Sarah, Abraham took another wife for himself named Keturah, and had 6 sons. These sons and the sons of Ishmael dwelt together and mingled, and it is these sons that became the Ishmaelites and the Arabs, not Esau. This can be noted in the book of Jubilees, page 80. Now, let's take a look at a law regarding marriage or remarrying. 1 Corinthians 7:39. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, only in Yahuwah. So here we have an instance that if you wish, you are free to remarry, but only after the death of your spouse, as did Abraham. In addition to this, also stated in the Torah, if you are divorced and you become another man's and get divorced again, the previous or the first husband or wife is not to be taken back or slept with again. This is an abomination in the eyes of Yahuwah. Now, after the death of Sarah, Abraham took a wife for his son Yitzhak, who was Rebekah. As far as I'm aware, this is the only wife Yitzhak would have, who gave birth to Jacob and Esau. More insight. Now, originally, the wives had already been selected for Jacob and Esau, but because Esau took Canaanite wives, which was forbidden, along with the Ishmaelite daughter, Jacob served his uncle for the hand of Rachel, only to be tricked by his uncle, and was given Leah, the eldest, instead. So Jacob again served his uncle for many years for the hand of Rachel. Leah originally was to be Esau's wife. This is how Jacob ended up with 2 wives instead of 1. Rachel and Leah also had handmaids, Zelpha and Bilhah. An interesting fact that speculated is that Bilhah and Zelpha were also their sisters. Moving forward, Bereshit or Genesis 29, 31-35. And when Yahuwah saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, and Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, Surely Yahuwah has looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, Because Yahuwah has heard that I was hated, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Shimon. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, Now this time will my husband be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Louis. And she conceived again and bore a son. And she said, Now will I praise Yahuwah. Therefore she called his name Yehuda, and ceased bearing. Bereshit or Genesis 30:1-9. And when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in Elohim's stead, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, as his wife. And Jacob went unto her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, Elohim has judged me, and has also heard my voice, and has given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, With great wrestling have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as his wife. From this we see, as a blessing, because Leah was unloved, she was able to bear children to Jacob while Rachel was barren. And once again, because she was jealous as well as barren, she gave her handmaid to Jacob as wife. After Leah stopped bearing children, she also did the same. At this point, it sort of became a competition between them, equating having more children with being more loved. However, once again, the issue is of bearingness, and the wives chose or gave their husband a wife for the purpose of children. Now, some argue, well, King Daud had multiple wives, King Solomon also, etc. Now, it's stated that this law was not known to them as kings, but let's look at the Torah. Devarim or Deuteronomy 17:15 and 17. You shall surely set him king over you, whom Yahuwah your Elohim shall choose. One from among your brethren you shall set king over you. You may not set a stranger over you, who is not your brother. Verse 17. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. Now let's look at some verses that correspond with this in the New Testament. 1 Timothy 3:2 and 12. Verse 2. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. Verse 12. Let the deacons be the husband of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. 1 Corinthians 7:2. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. In all these verses, it speaks of having one wife or one husband singularly. Now let's look at a prophecy pertaining to the remnant after the daughters of Zion will be humbled out of their haughty, arrogant, or prideful state. Yeshayahu or Isaiah 3:1. And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, We will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name, to take away our reproach. Now let's look at another verse that corresponds with this. Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah 23:3. And I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I have driven them, and will bring them again to their fold, and they shall be fruitful and increase. Now this is something that is to take place in the latter days, but I feel some have taken this as a green light to justify having multiple wives. But now there should be some things to be considered concerning multiple wives. You should have all your things together, meaning you should be capable of taking care of one wife, let alone multiple wives. Understand, having multiple wives is not the same as having multiple women in the worldly sense. You cannot have an orgy or threesome with your multiple wives, even if it's consensual, because it still goes against the laws of the Most High. We should understand that multiple wives was for the purpose of building up the nation. Happened in part when someone was bearing. The wives typically chose the wife for the husband, and husbands and wives were of their own tribes, where sex is concerned as being marriage. Multiple sex partners and sex outside marriage is fornication. In the days of old, you would typically be joined to a virgin, but a part of that sexual union was also a covenant and or ketubah, certificate of marriage, which you can get today and is recognized as a legal document of marriage. However, giving somebody a handwritten paper saying I divorce thee is not the same as getting a legalized certificate of divorce. So I just wanted to give a little insight on multiple wives, as I noticed some taking advantage of this and view it as having multiple women in the worldly sense, and to also educate our akudim who only wish to serve the Most High in sincerity. Is having multiple wives a sin? I would say no, but it shouldn't be corruptly justified to fulfill a lust for multiple women. All praise and glory belongs to Yahuwah, and to Yahushua HaMashiach and the Holy Spirit, and to you and yours, Shabbat Shalom.